Hi everyone, thank you for coming to this lecture recital about George Crumb's Metamorphoses Book 2. I've been working on this with a lot of joy for a while, and I'm excited to tell you about the piece and all the connections to the art that exist. So overall, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about George Crumb first, just some general information, his piano pieces, the notation that he uses, some techniques that you'll hear through the piece. I'll visualize some of them for you before I play the piece. And before the actual performance part, I'll talk about the connections of visual art and the music. Because George Crumb's piece is based off of 10 art pieces that he picked that were a few of his favorites. When I first got the score to this piece, I was really excited to start this and work on it. And I realized something interesting, that out of the 10 art pieces, 9 of them were created by white men. And this is just book 2. There's also a book 1, and for book 1, 10 out of 10 art pieces are created by white men. Now there was one of them that was a painting of Georgia O'Keeffe, American artist. And I opened the score, and just this movement that was based on Georgia O'Keeffe's artwork was just one page of music. And all the other ones are several, 3-4 pages. So I was like, interesting. So that kind of became my point of view while working on this. Okay, we'll talk about George Crumb a little bit first. He was born in 1929, just recently, in years, passed away in 2022. Very well known for his chamber works, Black Angels, Ancient Voices of Children, and The Voice of the Whale. And George Crumb is a very important composer for pianists specifically, because he introduced a whole different sound world to us. He's kind of known as like a timbralist. In a time where electronic new music came up, a lot of composers were experimenting with new sounds, and George Crumb was as well. But his, inspiration came from the acoustic world. So he started experimenting with new sounds, but sounds that he could create from the piano itself. Okay, one of the first pieces that he started doing that with was his piece called 5 Pieces for Piano from 1962. And this was when he, according to himself from interviews, first found his mature voice in writing. So his mature voice largely comes from exploring all these different techniques in the piano. Then you see a couple of his other big piano works. And Metamorphoses Book 1 and Book 2 were his last piano works. Finished Book 2 in 2020 and passed away in 2022. So one big thing that sometimes scares people away when doing music by Crumb is that all of it is handwritten. I kind of like it because that way he can be very specific. So here you see an excerpt from the piece that I'm about to play, and there's lots of notes. So with all these new techniques that he came up with, you need a lot of explanation because it's not in our performance practice. So some of them I'll show you later is like using yarn sticks, using rulers, that sort of thing inside the piano. So it can kind of be like a down when you first start with this music because you have to get to know the language first. But it doesn't take long though. Okay, I'll go quickly over some of the techniques that have been explored before in other papers by lots of musicians. But I want to quickly go over them so that you kind of get a sense of what you hear and connect it to what sort of sound. One of the things that he uses a lot are glissandos, and that's done by using any sort of nail or fingertip. and strum it across the strings. This, let's see, he writes here fortissimo 1. So with a lot of speed, sounds like that. But if you use like a fingertip and let's say pianissimo, you get a completely different sound. All right. Then there is muting. So muting, he uses the plus sign, and it means that you press the string with your finger. I'll first explain and then I'll show it to you. So the N means normal. So you have a normal key that's being played, and then a plus sign is for mute. And so the first example you'll see is just played by fingers. And then the second one, I left my muting device backstage. I'll need that for the performance part. But it's a piece of felt that you press so you can get a whole cluster of keys that are going to be muted, and it sounds like this. So that's normal and then mute after. Another technique is a pizzicato. So kind of self-explanatory, uses the strings and then the nail or the fingertip to create this sort of sound. This would be the nail. And you get a different sound when you use the fingertip to use the pizzicato technique. Okay, scraping is very interesting because it can kind of be like uncomfortable for some people, like nails on a chalkboard. This first example is from movement that's based on Paul Gauguin's piece, and George Crumb calls it the death drone. It keeps going throughout the whole piece, so you use 1 or 2 nails and a fingertip to kind of, well, scrape, so back and forth across the string, and you get this sort of sound. And you'll hear that it will keep going through the whole movement. Another way to scrape that he uses is multiple nails at once, put them on the string, and make sort of like this movement, so that the nails scrape all at the same time. And then there's one that you're going to see in a piece that's based off of Andrew Wyatt's art. That is a scrape that first goes towards the player and then away from the player. So you get this sort of sound. I mean, kind of uncomfortable, right? Let's see. Last technique that's specifically for the piano are overtones. You can get different partials, so different sort of notes that pop out when you press the string in a certain part. So with my thumb, I would be pressing the string, and with my nail of the same hand, I'm scraping, so that you mute the string on you make the string shorter. That's basically what it is, so you get a different pitch, and then you scrape and you hear that different pitch. So for example, A flat is this pitch, but when I mute the same string, or use the overtone, same string, but on that partial, you get this pitch. Let's see if I can get it. Can you hear it? Different pitch? Yeah. All right. There's different ways that you can use that. So that was a specific point. Let's see, for this one I need 2 hands. You can make a glissando. So glissando, the first one that I talked about, goes this way. But you can do glissando from like back of the piano to here and use different sort of overtones. So you know, if that's the string, you move your finger and press, and you get all these different overtones that are created. So that's what the example on the right is like. You see that slide that goes up, that's the left hand, and then the open, or the repetitive notes is the right hand just playing the key itself. Then in this specific work, there's a lot of percussion notation. George Crumb wrote for percussion a lot, being largely inspired by Bartók. And in this piece, you get a combination of notation. So for percussion and for piano, but one player plays all of it. So the way that he uses that notation is he'll just specifically write in words what instrument you need to use. And then if there's an instrument that can create multiple sort of sounds, he uses this like box with a little arrow next to it to point out the direction in which he'll be playing it. So this one on the left is for wind chimes, and I'll just be playing it like this. If there's a single stroke and he wants you to play, well, for example, this is this drum. He uses one note and like this sort of wave that, of course, is easier to notate because he notates everything by hand. It's one note and you'll just let it vibrate. Oh. And there can be different instruments. I'm gonna use this whole setup, of course. Okay, then you're gonna hear some voice techniques. There's a whisper. You're gonna hear me say the words, "from the far away, nearby." That's towards the end. He uses the titles. So the far away nearby is George O'Keeffe. Guernica is Picasso's work. And at the very end, he writes a ghostly wind music that will be in Van Gogh. I could not say it Van Gogh. Van Gogh. In the last movement. So it's going to be me sort of like singing those pitches. For the other two, the pitches don't matter. Just uses one line and you whisper. And for the last one, he wants specific pitches. And I'll be kind of sort of ghostly singing that. Okay. Now let's get to the title of the piece, Metamorphoses. It's kind of unclear to me what the connection is to other artists that have used this title. So if anyone's familiar with Ovidius, he wrote poetry, a whole poetry book that's called Metamorphoses, that is about gender transformations, transforming from animal to human, transformations in nature. And there's composers before Crumb that have used that as inspiration. Richard Strauss used it based off a book from Goethe. Philip Glass did the same thing with Kafka. And Crumb really liked to use poetry. Like he did a lot of works based off of Lorca's poetry. But for this one, he kind of said in an interview, well, I opened a book of artworks and I just picked the ones that I really liked. Which can be an interesting way to go, but I wonder maybe if you all find specific meaning in the art pieces that he chose. Because there are other artists like Bernini, and more recently in 2022, Sharon Bala, that is an intersex person that used this theme and created art around it, that it really gives it another layer. So this is one of the things that I'm trying to find in these artworks. that I will now talk about a little more. So, first movement is based off of Paul Klee's work, Ancient Sound Abstract on Black. And as you can see, there's two artworks. I hope you can see it well, but you also have your hand out, maybe you can see it there too. So I'm sort of proposing another artwork next to the original artwork to show you what Crumb maybe could have chosen if he included, more artists from different backgrounds, genders. So to the right, we see a work by Sophie Teuber-Arp, and she created this work around the same time, same region as Paul Klee, same sort of collective of artists, but she was 5 years earlier than him. Of course, there's different colors, so it's gonna sound different when you see the paintings moving on the screen later when I play the music. So this is more an abstract interpretation. The second one is another Paul Klee. I think you really loved Paul Klee. There's two more in book one. I think he included 4 Paul Klees. With yellow birds, also an abstract work of art. And the one that I'm putting next to that is made by Gabriele Münter. And Münter was actually one of the original founders of the Der Blaue Reiter. So that was the art group that Paul Klee was a part of at the beginning of the 20th century. But Münter is rarely ever mentioned. It's always Kandinsky, and the founder of Der Blaue Reiter, but she was too. And she made this work where we see birds on a tree outside, but we also have this person sitting and looking out to the birds. So that's going to add a different layer to the music, I think. The third one is Andrew Wyatt's Christina's World. And this painting, if you remember the scraping sound that I made, you're going to hear that in this movement. Christina was Andrew Wyatt's neighbor, and she had an illness that made her unable to walk. So the woman that you see laying on this field is laying because she can't stand. And she refused to sit in a wheelchair, so she used her arms to just crawl. And that says something about the inner world, like he's projecting like an emotion here. The one that you see on the right is Alice Neal's Ginny. And Ginny was created in 1984, in the year that Alice Neal died. And Ginny is her daughter-in-law, and this is her after she had just lost her own mother. So it's also portraying like an inner world of someone. But in this case, we can see her face, we can see her eyes, we can see the emotion in there. And I kind of think it's interesting that these two artists are both from Pennsylvania, both work with like emotions in their art. And the contrast between the two paintings is that you can see Ginny's face, but you don't know what Christina looks like. So I wonder if she's, happy crawling around. Or not. The fourth one is Purple Haze, and Simon Dinnerstein was somebody that George Crumb personally knew. He made the left one, the lady floating across the city, and it made me think of Tamara de Lempica's art. She's very well known for her nudes, so I started looking into her art, and I found one with a woman that's actually obviously clothed, but the city is in the background. So I think it's kind of like similar vibes, and you can see that the posture of the lady in Tamara de Lempica's painting is much more like secure, and the other one is more like surrender. The fifth work is by Gustav Klimt, Lots of Gold, and you're going to hear that in the music by lots of, using the wind chimes and fast notes on the piano. And the painting next to it on the right is by Bronkia Koller, and she lived in a time before the start of the 20th century when it was very hard to be a painter professionally as a woman. And I read something about painting classes that women, when they were finally allowed to take like professional art classes, they were still not allowed to study the human body. So they were not allowed to look at naked people and study them and paint them or draw them, but instead they were presented cows. They had to learn how to paint cows, maybe a house too. So I think this is a nice sort of contrasting way to show that this is the same time, the same place. They were both based in Vienna and part of Secession, and they both use gold, but Koller does it in a very simplified manner. This one is an interesting story. Paul Gauguin, the sixth movement, the spirit of the dead watching. The girl that you can see, I think for a long time people assumed that it was a woman, but it's really just a little girl that Paul Gauguin drew and painted and became one of the most famous paintings ever. But she was probably only around 12 years old, and this was his child bride. Well, he had a wife, by the way, in Denmark. So traveled to Tahiti and married a child. So when you know that information, it just makes it so eerie. George Crumb writes as introduction for the piece Mysterious. So I think he really focused on the spirit of the dead watching in the corner. And I just wonder if he knew about this information. But you know, the research was, the information was available at the time that he wrote the piece. So I'm projecting another piece by Frida Kahlo, who went through a lot of physical pain in her life, and she portrayed that by making a self-portrait where she lays in her bed. This is her, and the dead is watching her, spirit of the dead, basically. But you know, it's her, it's a self-portrait, so it's a very different meaning, and I wonder if that changes the sound when you listen to it. Okay, seventh movement is Pablo Picasso's Guernica, about the war, Nazis coming to Spain. And it's very aggressive. You're gonna hear a lot of loud noises. I'm gonna be using rulers that I have to place inside the piano over all of the strings. It's gonna be very aggressive sounds. And when studying this and looking for sort of a substitute for this painting, it made me think of Faith Ringgold's piece, American People Series number 20, Die, that I saw in New York, and when I sat in front of it, I couldn't look away. It's so violent, and it's just like Guernica, it's a mural, it's huge. And this one is about civil war in the United States. So I just wonder, with George Crumb being an American composer, if this would have been a good fit for this movement. Number 8 is Georgia O'Keeffe's From the Faraway Nearby. Georgia O'Keeffe moved to New Mexico and was very inspired by nature in her artwork. And if you're wondering why, this project started as sort of a way to include, you know, more female artists. Why replace a female artist that is included? To me, it's sort of, Georgia O'Keeffe is a big name, and I started to think about it. What is sort of a similar thing when you think about the world of music? When we started, you know, society, researchers, looking for female artists in music, There's a lot of attention on like Clara Schumann, Fanny Mendelssohn, all these names that were made name because they were related to men that were famous, their husbands, their fathers. So for sort of a similar reason, I think we should look further than just Clara Schumann, you know. I think we can do the same thing in the art world. Everybody knows Georgia O'Keeffe, and it's a good thing that she's included in this series. But what if we look a little bit further? So I found this artist called Amy Whitehorse. She's still alive, and she was born in New Mexico, and she's Native American. She is very inspired by nature, and the connection of us as humans to the earth. And her work is a little more abstract. It's called jackstraw. So it just reminded me of the desert. I think even though color-wise they're different, I think it fits very well with the music. Number 9 is Marc Chagall's Easter. And this, Marc Chagall was very religious person. Leonora Carrington from the UK is really was not. She was brought up in a Catholic family, but she wanted to move away with it. So these are two very contrasting paintings. But Crumb describes it as sort of like a feast. Like when you hear the music, you should think about a feast, having a good time. It's just a very different sort of feast. I don't know if you can see it from far behind, but that's a little baby there. That they're, I don't know, at some point probably gonna eat. So it's very surrealistic. She makes very dark art. And Marc Chagall's work, he places all of the people at the dinner table tucked away in the corner, and his work is more about like religion. Leonora Carrington puts the feast at the center. Very last one. Vincent van Gogh, Starry Night, so famous, and I think this one actually fits really well, this movement with the music that George Crumb wrote. So I had a very hard time actually finding something that could be used instead. And I landed with Yayoi Kusama, who is still alive, by the way, 97 years old. She did not live at the same time as Van Gogh. You know, I started looking into, are there some contemporaries of Van Gogh that I can find? But he was just so, I don't know, ahead of his time. But there are similarities, even though they were never alive at the same time, same time, Yayoi Kusama and Van Gogh. They both used very, like abstract sort of like waves, lines, and they also both struggled with mental illness and hallucinations. So you can sort of see similar patterns in her art. And Yayoi Kusama is also known for these big rooms. I don't know if anyone has seen these infinity rooms where she places mirrors and lots of lights in the room, so it's almost as if you are inside Starry Night. Okay, it's time to play. I'm gonna take a 3-minute break.